Hello and welcome to Let's Talk with Dr. Celeste, MD. We are here on a Sunday afternoon for part two of our talk on vitamin D. I am Dr. Celeste, MD, your board-certified family medicine physician and urgent care specialist. We have been sharing with you health topics for the last couple of months for just a few minutes on this Sunday afternoon. So we'll wait just a few minutes to see if we have some people that want to climb on board and hear what we have to share about vitamin D. Hi, Mr. Willis. That's my husband. Thank you for watching. Last week we talked about vitamin D, and we talked about some of the symptoms of vitamin D deficiency. We talked about some of the benefits of vitamin D. We talked about some of the places or sources of our vitamin D. And so we'll touch a little bit on that, but today's topic mainly is about vitamin D and the myths or affiliation with cancer, in addition to the association or affiliation of vitamin D deficiency and diabetes. So we'll give it just a moment or two. I hope that all of you are out there enjoying your Sunday afternoon. I appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedule to climb on board and just take a few moments to listen to what we have to share with you today about vitamin D. So we'll give it another moment or two. Okay. So we will go ahead and get started. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, Katrina, how are you? We're talking about vitamin D part 2. On last week, you may recall, we talked about vitamin D, what it is. It is a prohormone or something that we need in our bodies that help us to build strong bones and strong teeth. Vitamin D aids in the absorption of calcium as well as phosphorus. So vitamin D sources, we get it from our skin. We get it from supplements, and we get it from our diet. So we'll delve into that just a little bit. One of the things that we have talked about as well is the affiliation or association of vitamin D and cancer. What have researchers found, or what are they saying about the affiliation of vitamin D and cancer? And while they cannot affiliate cancer as being a sole agent in the prevention of cancer, what they have found is that there's some studies that have been performed that have shown that there is an affiliation of decreased risk of colorectal cancer in patients that have high vitamin D levels. There was a study that was performed actually in 2018, June of 2018, between the World Health Organization and the American Cancer Society. They took a population of patients that suffered with colorectal cancer and compared their vitamin D levels, and what they found is that patients that have higher levels of vitamin D had decreased risk of having colorectal cancer. Subsequently, there are other studies that were performed in trying to find an affiliation between vitamin D levels as well as breast or prostate cancer. And the results from that were mixed, such that they could not definitively say that higher vitamin D levels were affiliated with lower risk of breast cancer nor with prostate cancer. So what does all of that mean? What that means is that there's a study that was just released in July of 2019 that suggests that there is definitely a benefit that's seen in patients that have high levels of vitamin D and a decreased risk of colorectal cancer. So it is important to make sure that you have adequate vitamin D intake, especially if you know that there's a risk of colorectal cancer, especially that in your family. So, what is the myth regarding diabetes, type 2 diabetes specifically, and vitamin D? Well, there are studies that were performed in 2010 that found that lower levels of vitamin D were affiliated with reduced risk of insulin sensitivity. So what is insulin sensitivity? Insulin is a hormone that is produced by your pancreas. That's an organ that sits on top of your stomach. It produces insulin in an effort to help control your blood sugar levels. So what happens is, in patients, they found that there was an affiliation in patients with lower levels of vitamin D that they had decreased insulin sensitivity. What this means is how well or how sensitive the insulin is or how well it works. There's a decrease in that sensitivity. So what they found is that patients who have lower levels of vitamin D tended to have a reduced sensitivity in the insulin. In other words, their blood sugar levels may not be as effectively controlled. Therefore, they're recommending that patients that have low levels of vitamin D definitely replace them. As a result of this study that happened in 2010, there was a study that happened actually just published in July of this year that showed the affiliation between, they did a study where they studied a population of high vitamin D levels in patients that were at the risk of becoming pre-diabetic or diabetic, and they watched them having high vitamin D levels for about 6 months. And what they found is that patients that replace their vitamin D or have that higher vitamin D level were less likely to go on to develop a higher risk of increased developing diabetes or newly diagnosed type 2 diabetes. So what does all of this, all these studies, what does all of this mean? All of this means is that if you are a person who has low vitamin D, I would encourage you to replace it. If you're a person or individual who has family risk of diabetes, there are two affiliations that are associated with people developing diabetes that kind of brings this in totality. People that are obese tend to have lower vitamin D levels, and so the lower vitamin D level is actually not the causation. In actuality, patients that are obese are at increased risk for developing type 2 diabetes. So the studies have shown, okay, these patients have lower vitamin D levels, and these are patients that are higher risk for getting diabetes. The affiliation is with the obesity. So what all of this means in totality is that we need to regulate our vitamin D levels. Studies have shown that in the United States, 40% of adults are deficient in vitamin D. That means 4 out of every 10 individuals. We've seen and talked about that vitamin D is very important for bone health. We've talked about the broad health benefits of vitamin D. We have the study that showed that increased vitamin D levels were affiliated with a lower risk of colorectal cancer. But again, vitamin D cannot be used as a sole agent in the prevention of cancer. There's just an affiliation in these groups that we've seen. So, increased vitamin D levels show increased insulin sensitivity, in certain groups. So what all this means is that we need to be aware of what's going on for our general health. If you have a low vitamin D level, I would encourage you to definitely replace it and make sure you take the supplementation. A lot of times patients will share, oh, Dr. Celeste, it's just a vitamin, it's just vitamin D, but it is something that's very important for keeping your bones and your teeth strong. You may not care about that in your young state until or unless you have a complication of having a low vitamin D level. So for your broad general health, I encourage you to get your vitamin D level checked if you haven't already. If you're concerned about how do I make sure I have an adequate intake of vitamin D, we suggest that you spend 10 to 20 minutes out in the sun at least 3 days a week, and definitely use your skin block. Use something to help provide protection for your skin when you go out and are exposed to the UV radiation. But to spend 10 or 20 minutes at least 3 days a week out in the sun. You can also get vitamin D through your diet, through fatty fish like salmon, tuna, or mackerel. You can find it in egg yolks. You can find it in beef liver. You can find it in liver oils. In addition to that, you can find vitamin D just through general supplementation with the multivitamin, and then there's actually even over-the-counter vitamin D. So I encourage you to take vitamin D for your broad health benefit, but if you're found to have low vitamin D, definitely replace it. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap up this episode of Let's Talk with Dr. Celeste. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. We'll be with you on next Sunday at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. Feel free, if you're watching this in replay, to put hashtag replay in the comment section. We ask that you would share this information with anyone of your family or friends or anyone you think that could benefit from this information. And if you'd like, you may follow me on social media at facebook.com/Dr. Celeste MD. That's facebook.com/DoctorCelestemD. Thanks so much. Have a good afternoon. Thank you so much, Mr. Craig, Sarah Allison, Daphne, for watching, as well as Katrina. I hope you guys enjoy it and have a wonderful Sunday afternoon. Thank you.